Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I know very few of you, but I'm glad to be here. My name is Patrick, and I live in the city of Miami, Florida. With my family, I'm married, and I have 4 children, and for about 3 months, they're all teenagers. So I've been thinking about what that means and whether we should really live it up for 3 or 4 months while we're all teenagers. So if you have ideas, let me know. I'm the director of a new school that's starting in Miami to serve young people whose families have fewer resources than many of us have. I'd love to talk to you more about that later sometime. I was born in the middle of a major baby boom at my parents' church. I think that everyone who could have a baby was having a baby. I'm pretty close that way. And this is me over here on the far side. Now, thinking about babies is actually a really good place to start when we think about education. Consider education, consider babies. Babies are wonderful. One of my daughters loves babies. If there's a baby, she walks over towards it. She wants to hold the baby. She wants to snuggle the baby. She makes all kinds of strange little noises. You tell me why babies are so wonderful. They're innocent. More.
They represent life.
They represent life.
They're a gift from God.
They're a gift from God. You're keeping it really up here in the philosophical. They're also squishable. They're huggable. All of these things are true, aren't they? Babies, there's a lot right with babies, but there are 2 things that are problematic with babies. Babies have 2 significant problems, and they are these. First of all, babies are immature. They're like unripened fruit. They have all the pieces, right? Babies have fingers, they have noses, they have toes, and actually, we tend to look at them like, oh, look at those little fingers, look at those little toes. But really, if the baby stayed immature, we would find it very problematic. So they have all the pieces, like a piece of fruit that's not ready to eat, but we want them to grow towards what? You tell me. So if it's immature, we're looking for maturity. That's right. So we're looking for maturity, and what that means is that the child can actually do something with all those parts. Does a baby have a brain? The answer is
yes.
By the way, we have a baby right back here. So he has a brain, he has fingers, he has a mouth, he has tongues, he has everything he needs to talk and to explain things, but he does not have the powers to use them yet. All right, are you with me? So the parts are there. He doesn't have spiritual abilities, emotional abilities, social abilities, physical abilities, thinking abilities that we would want him to have. So problem number 1 with the baby is immature. Do you want to wager what the next one is? What's the other problem with the baby? They are dependent, which I think has some to do with this, but some to do with the next one. The other problem is that frankly they're ignorant. Now, I'll warn you, I don't suggest you go to a new mother and say, that's a really nice baby, and honestly, your baby has a couple problems. They're ignorant and immature. Not a good starting point when you're having a conversation with a mother. But it's true, babies have a lot of ignorance. And I see it's a problem, right? That's the way they're supposed to be. But it would be a problem if they stayed that way. They're ignorant, and we want to move them towards what? What's the opposite of ignorance? Knowledge. That's right. So we're going from ignorance to knowledge. We want them to have useful knowledge, helpful knowledge that will give them judgment and wisdom. We want them to think logically and to think graciously. And to take care of this problem, these 2 problems, and I need to tell you here, the person who really helped me think about this was the first president of the University of Illinois 100 and some years ago, a man by the name of John Milton Gregory, who wrote a wonderful book about education, and he talks about this situation. To take care of this problem, we engage in something that we call what? Education. So at its most fundamental core, I think it's helpful for us to think about teaching as simply the process of taking a baby and turning it into an adult. In some ways, this just gives you a lot of peace about your job. What do you do every day? I work at transforming ignorant, immature babies, toddlers, little children, adolescents, teenagers whose brains aren't fully developed yet, into mature and knowledgeable people. And we could maybe just stop right there. Because now you're going home excited, aren't you? Because that's an amazing job. To take these beautiful creatures that God has brought into this world and take them and transform them into mature, knowledgeable people that can do God's work in His world. Now, the question is this. What is the end goal, though? Why do we do that? So we want them to be knowledgeable and them to be mature, but for what? What is the end? What is the purpose? Because what you decide is your end and your purpose will affect a lot what you do during those years of going from ignorance to knowledge and from immaturity to maturity. The knowledge you give will be different. The types of skills you develop will be different if the answer to this question is different. So that's what we're going to talk about this morning, very simply. We're going to talk about the process of taking babies to adults, but look at the question of why, and then say, what difference does it make in the way we actually go about doing that education? Are we good with that? Okay, let's pray, and then we'll dive in. Lord, thank you for the opportunity to hang out with other people who are wise and knowledgeable, mature, who are in this work with me. We pray that as we think together, as we just think hard, stubbornly about this question about why we educate, that it would give us energy and a drive and skills to go back on Monday and put this in work. In Jesus' name, amen. So when I was a year and a half, I was still a baby. My mom and dad packed all their belongings, or most of them, into 55-gallon steel drums. And we moved to the Caribbean, where my dad was a pastor on the little island of Puerto Rico. And I grew up in Puerto Rico. I may look white on the outside, but I'm Puerto Rican inside. That's my homeland. And I lived there for the majority of my childhood and my growing up years. And that experience has had a significant shaping influence on my life. It has affected the way I think about education, why we do education, and how we teach. And what I want to share this morning is this, that I think that schooling, education, could and should play a strategic role in accomplishing what God wants to do in the world. And in a nutshell, that's what I want to say this morning. That Christian education could and it should play a strategic role in accomplishing what God is doing in the world. The way we educate our children is critical to prepare a people of God with the desires and skills to accomplish His work in the world. The question is, what in the world is God doing? What is God doing in the world? And we could spend a lot of time talking about that, but I want to just go to the spot in the Bible where I think, in kind of the tightest space possible, Jesus very clearly says what He's doing. And if this is what Jesus is doing, I think we want to be doing the same thing. And He just states, this is what I'm about. So it's in a passage where Jesus is in this intense conversation with His disciples, and He asks one of His disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And the disciple answered, "Who is right?" And then Jesus said, "Okay, if that's who I am, this is what I do. This is what I'm doing." So, you know what? Let's just read it together. Can you all see the screen? Let's read this passage together. And it's Matthew 16, 13 through 20. Here goes. Together out loud.
Jesus asked His disciples, saying, "Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" So they said, "Some say John the Baptist, some Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered and said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus answered and said to him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter."
Now watch this.
"And on this rock,
Be careful.
I will build my church."
Period. What is Jesus doing in the world? He is
Building His church.
That's it. Jesus said. very clearly. Now, we could go and look at the Old Testament. We could talk about Abraham, when God announced this, that he was going to be doing this. The Bible says in Galatians chapter 3 that the gospel was first preached to who? To Abraham. The gospel was first preached to Abraham. Jesus says, I am building my church. That's what I'm doing in the world right now. And we know some things about this effort, this business that Jesus is in. It is international. It is global in its scope, right? It was in Texas it's happening, and it's also happening in Taiwan. It's all around the world. We know that to build the church requires a multitude of tasks. We need people who are moms. We need people who are dads. We need people who are teachers. We need people who are training disciples. We need people who care for the needy. We need people who work in nursing homes. We need people who provide for their family needs. We need personal evangelism. We need worship. We need technology development. We need singing. I hope I'm touching on all the occupations in the room. We need building, and we need preaching, and we need Bible study, and we need counseling, and we need graphic design people, and we need people who care for the earth and plant crops. We need all of those things to get this job done. It's also, we also know this, that it's accomplished through the gifting and work of every member of the body. Okay, so it's international in scope. It doesn't matter where you live in the world. It doesn't really matter what you do for an occupation. If the church is going to be built and God has chosen to use us, we need everyone, everywhere. And so God is in the process of building a multi-ethnic church through the work of believers who are all around in the world, doing a whole diversity of jobs. The question is this: why should schools be involved? This picks up a little bit from what the speaker was talking about last night. So we've said we want to raise adults. We know that Jesus is building his church, but why and how do schools get involved with the business of building the church? So I'm going to give you a few rationales. There are more. Okay, so here's the way I think about this. Number one, contributing to the work of building the church will be the most significant activity our students will be involved with in their life. If you ask someone what is the most significant thing you could be doing right now, you would say, I would hope, well, doing what Jesus wanted me to do. Well, what does Jesus want done? He said, I am building my church. So schools are in the business of preparing young people for successful living. And I had the opportunity to teach in a public school for a little bit when I was doing some student teaching. And guess what the public schools want to do? And some of them are very successful. They want to prepare people who can live successfully as citizens of the United States of America if they're in the United States. Okay, that's their goal. They want people who vote. They want people who pledge allegiance to the flag. They want people who follow laws. And they want people who go out and make money. Why? To make America great. Yeah. I saw myself slipping into that. I'll stay out. We fail students if we don't prepare themselves for the most important and successful living in their life, which is being involved not as citizen of the United States of America, but being citizen of the Heavenly Kingdom. So if schools are in the business of preparing young people to be successful in their lives and to be citizens of their nation, our nation is the kingdom of heaven. And our king has said what he's going to do. He says, I'm building my church. We know we want to be involved with what he's involved in. And so our schools somehow should be preparing people for successful living. So that's one reason. The second one. I think I know something of the audience that I'm talking to here. If your schools are something like the schools I've worked in, most of our students will see their final formal training happening where? As whose students? Your students. Now, there are people who go and get more training in college. There are people that want to become nurses and they go to nursing school. But unlike many of our neighboring schools, most of our future dads and moms and missionaries and church leaders and ministry workers and business owners and entrepreneurs, they're going to leave 10th grade, 11th grade, or 12th grade, and they're going to go where? To their life's calling. And I see examples of this in my own life. I had a student who I taught when he was young, I taught him in high school, And then he became my pastor. It was fun. He would come to me and ask me to critique his sermons for him. Okay? But did he go to seminary before he became a pastor? No. Where had he last gone to school and studied how to read text and how to talk? He did that as my student. I have had multiple fellow teachers who were former students of mine. Did they go off and get 4-year degrees and learn more about how to teach before they ended up back in our school? No. They may have done one of the faith builders, done this, that, or that thing, but basically they came out of our schools and then went back where? Into our schools. Their schooling at our school was their last formal education. I received a note once from a former student of mine who was a missionary in Haiti, and he said, "Thank you for teaching me about communication because I'm working on my first sermon." See, the schooling he had received was the final schooling. And so, if our students are going to do that, if they're going to go from our schools and engage in the work that God has called them as farmers, as builders, as entrepreneurs, as business owners, as pastors and church leaders, then our schools, I think, should take seriously being involved in the work of the church. The third one. I think that focusing our schools' ultimate effort on preparing students for God's work will bring significant energy from our community, especially from people who sometimes have questioned the value of education. You see, there's a lot of disagreement on why we educate, and sometimes it makes schooling a battlefield. You know what I'm talking about? Some people say, "Why do I have to take algebra? I'll never use this in life." But then you have the other parent over here saying, "Well, I wish they taught advanced biology in our school." What are you supposed to do with that? What are you supposed to do with a group of students whose one parent wants their child to learn all they can and get polished in every area, and another parent who wonders why their child should go to school past X grade? You know what I'm talking about? A friend of mine noted that people kind of have 3 reasons for sending their students at least into high school. He said there are kind of 3 groups of people. One group says school is a place to train for the trades, for farming, for domestic skills, and you only take any skill, any classes that basically help you be a good dad, mom, or you work in the trades. That's kind of one group of people. There's another group of people who think of school and they're thinking, "I want my child to go to college." And so they want school to be college prep. There's a third group that says, that's kind of in between those. The third group says, "This is the last schooling my child will get. I want it to be sort of like college light. It's finishing school. This is the place we finish off our education." And in your schools, you may have parents from all 3 of those categories. You may have some saying, "Let's do the least amount of education possible." Some who are saying, "I want the most education possible in a college track." And then you have some who say, "Well, let's get as much as we can because this is the last stop." If we could reorient our schools and help our students and parents think about school, not in terms of just what my student can get out of it, but preparing young people to be involved in God's work in the world and building His church, I believe there will be renewed fuel and energy and common ground for people to stand on. Because all 3 of those groups of people can all agree that they want their child to be involved with what God is doing in the world. And so if our schools exist to raise up young people who can be involved in the church, then more people can agree on school being important. And actually, it will change what we teach in our schools some as well. So let me give you an example. I remember a field trip I was on. It was a long drive, and your students are in the vehicles. This can be one of the most depressing activities as a teacher. Stuck in the car. You want to go to Cotton in Texas? This is a real aside. It's not in my notes. We're just talking about pictures. I took a group of 5th, 6th, 7th grade students, sort of like that, on a trip in South Carolina where I was teaching at the time. And we went on a 4 to 5 hour trip. We never do this in a car. And I had all this group of guys, and we passed a whole bunch of cotton fields that had just been picked. And the whole argument the way there was which brand of cotton picker picked that field versus the other people. That's a John Deere that picked that cotton field. That's a Case IH that picked that cotton field. They didn't all agree on which was the best brand. Oh my word. That was a bad trip. So I was on a trip, and this was with 10th graders, and I heard a girl discussing how she was thinking about dropping out of school. Now, our school generally students go to 12th grade. She was in 10th grade. And I heard her having this conversation. I think I'm quitting school. I'm dropping out of school. Well, today she might be one of the biggest boosters of our school. She's stuck in there. And I taught a class on how to study the Bible. And all of a sudden, she was on fire about studying the Bible. She started going and buying, Bible dictionaries and commentaries and these sorts of things. And she fell in love with something that she saw as very important. How do you study the Bible? Will she be a better Sunday school teacher? Yes. Will she be a better communicator with other people who want to know the Lord? Yes, because in school she learned a skill that was involved with what? Building what God is building in the world. And I believe her father ended up someone who was kind of this very practical, not really a strong supporter for at least higher education, become someone who really cared about the school because he saw his children gaining things in school, not just to make them wealthier, but gaining things that were going to make a difference in the church. So what I'm saying is, if our schools over time and our students realize, and we'll talk about how we do this in a little bit, but if they realize that what we do in school is about me being able to plug into what God is doing in the world, there is renewed energy for school among people who might disagree on what school is. Now, this does not happen like that, right? This is a process, but it is something I think worth pushing on. All educational systems have a measure of greatness. And our measure of greatness in schools, of what I'm talking about, is different from the measure of greatness of most schools of those around us. If you go to your local high school and you ask someone what is the measure of whether you've been successful with your students, what will they say? What would a traditional high school say is a measure of success? What are the metrics? Okay, they'll look at test scores. What else?
Productive member of society.
Productive member of society, which may be related to their earning potential.
Yeah.
Okay, what else? Which universities their students go to. They want to see how many students get into X university, how many go to college, how many graduate from college, and which ones went to Yale and Harvard. Okay, so that's a measure of success. They look at their graduate status in the community. They call back their former students to speak at graduation, and they don't call back the guy who is working at the local hardware store faithfully. They call back the person who, was appointed by Governor Abbott to do X, Y, or Z, right? The greatness of our graduates will be measured in a different way if this is our goal. If our goal is to raise up people who are involved in what God is doing in the world, our measure will be the measure that Jesus gave for greatness. Can you tell me what it is? He or she who wants to be the greatest, be the servant of all. So our measure of greatness in a school that is oriented towards, are we doing what God wants us to be doing in the world? Are we preparing students to be involved in building the church? Will be, do our servants, do our students and our graduates serve faithfully? Period. Of course, love and serve the Lord faithfully. The goal of Christian education is to prepare servants of Christ involved in his work in his world. And where do you find those servants? You find them at work, disking fields. You find them in barn shops. You find them in kitchens. You find them in office buildings. You find them in poultry barns and hog barns and hospitals, in cross-cultural ministry settings. They're all over the place, getting accomplished what God wants accomplished in the world. But the measure is not the same measure that everyone else does. So, two pictures in a story to wrap up with. Okay? So, what does this actually look like? It's helpful to have a picture, right? So here's the first picture. It's a picture, and if you just carry two things away with you, carry these two pictures of what I think our schools could be, and the way you should think. By the way, how many of you are teachers? Like, you're going to go Monday. I'm. Okay, how many of your board members? Okay, so for those of your teachers, you need to think, how does what I'm hearing here affect what I do in the classroom on Monday? It doesn't. It actually gives you energy to teach math well, but it also helps you think about the conversations you're going to have and the stories you're going to read and those sorts of things as as well. If you want to think about more of this, that's our second session. We're going to get very practical in terms of what do you do in the classroom. Sheep. Which person in the Bible do you think goes into sheep? Okay, so here goes. Psalm 78. Let's read it together again. He, who's he? God. All right, let's say God.
God chose David his servant and took him from the sheepfolds, from following the nursing ewes, and he brought him to shepherd Jacob his people, Israel his inheritance.
Now, what was he looking for? Right? What was this?
Servant.
By the way, what word does the Bible use to describe Jesus in Isaiah? My servant. A few years ago, I did a survey of the Bible to see what the Bible said about leaders. The word leaders didn't really show up in the Bible at all. What's the word that shows up?
Servant.
What was he looking for? With upright heart, he shepherded them and guided them with his skillful hands. I'd suggest there are three factors here that are the nature, what they are like. And so this is our goal in our schools. If we're going to raise up people who are servants, like David, involved in God's word, so that they can shepherd God's people, here are the three characteristics. Number one is a servant heart. A servant heart. Now, when the Bible talks about heart, it's not talking about what?
Mind.
So,
Okay? So what is it talking about?
Character.
Well, turn and talk to somebody. I'll figure this out. Go ahead, turn and talk. Take 30 seconds. What does the Bible mean when it's talking about the heart? Okay, go ahead.
I understood the question.
Oh, so you said he means the mind.
Yes.
Okay. Or turn and talk. Come on. I need a second to look at my notes. So go ahead. But seriously, turn and talk. What does the Bible actually mean when it says that he had an upright heart? What could all that include? Go ahead. Turn to the person beside you and turn and talk. Go ahead.
It's the center of what's wrong.
Okay, that's good. The gentleman back here who said mind earlier, he just said something else. We're going to let him talk. He has a deep voice that stands out. And I heard what you said. Okay, you said it has something to do with
Well, it's the very inner part of your mind or who you are. Like, as you develop it, you don't start off necessarily like that, but as you grow, you learn, and it's that part of the person when nobody's looking, nobody's hearing you. It's who you are.
Okay.
Core of your being.
It's the center and core of your being, which is not the biological organ in here. I'm not sure where all it's located. I think some of it is located in your mind, consciousness. It is the central core of you, and I think a big part of that is your mind. It's your emotions, your will, it's all of that. And the Bible just sums it up as your heart, right? So one of the things that we're going to raise up young people who are involved in the most important work of the world, then we need to look at how do we nurture upright people, upright hearts, hearts that love God, okay? That are driven to action because they love God. We want to develop people who want to be involved in God's Word. And it's not enough, I'll just suggest here, to say, you should love God, you should love God, you should be involved. It's not so much a talking thing. Notice I use the word nurture. Like you don't take a plant and pull on it. You do what? You water it, you fertilize it, you spray some things on it, you baby it. You baby it. You waft it into a really healthy plant. You don't jerk around with it. I'd suggest that raising young people who have upright hearts is more of a nurturing and growing. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, so number two, the second piece. So one is the upright heart. Number two is skillfulness of hand. Hello, David had some skills. It wasn't enough. This kind of feels radical to say. It wasn't enough just to have a really good heart. God was also looking for someone who had some skills. He said he guided them with his skillful hand. And where had David learned those skills?
Out pasture.
Out in the pasture. He had had an opportunity to be seasoned with some exposure, with some experience. And the exposure and experience that God gave him was out working with sheep, where he had encountered various troubles and dealt with them. They were bad. They were thinking, we learned about this last night, didn't we? So it was taking care of those lions and bears that prepared for Goliath. Can you think of any other people in the Bible that God used? They had good hearts, they were skillful, and they had had some seasoning, some time to mature. Name some other people.
Moses.
Moses. By the way, was Moses skillful? Moses was incredibly skillful. He had been trained possibly as an army general in Egypt. Did you ever think about what his training was like? He was the prince, or the princess's son. Some people argue that he may have actually led the Egyptian army or parts of the Egyptian army. We don't know. What we do know is that he was raised and given a lot of skill, and then God needed to season him and work on his heart, so God sent him out to work on that for a while. Moses, like it was reversed. He got the skillfulness, and then he had to get working on the heart and the other, and then finally he was useful. Can you think of some other people that had this combination? Joseph, okay? And I can think of the Apostle Paul, who, again, came with skillfulness. Their hearts have to be right. Okay, so when you look at your students, think, how can I help nurture a heart towards God? How can I develop their skills? That's really valuable. They need to be able to add. They need to be able to read. They need to do all those things. That is godly. And they need opportunities to practice. Okay? So I would say the nature of the sort of people we're looking for in school have those three qualities. So, lovers of God, they love God with their upright heart, they have skillful hands, and they have a chance to be seasoned. Now, second picture. Well, maybe it'll show up. So, my father-in-law is a greenhouse operator. Nurture has to do with growing things and caring for things. And so let's just think a little bit about greenhouse operators who are growing plants. One of the things they care about in the greenhouse is the environment. They care about the temperature. They care about the humidity in those greenhouses. And they're constantly watching the climate. If a greenhouse gets way too hot or way too cold, you have problems with your plants. If it's too humid or too dry, those are things they're constantly watching and caring for. I would suggest that in our homes, in our churches, in our schools, the environment, like in a greenhouse, has to do with the culture, what the cultural climate is at. That's the way we do things. It's the unstated things that happen. It's the conversations that are not really programmed. They're just the ones that bubble up. The kind of the value and the characters of the teachers that are in the classroom. If we care about nurturing people like David, we better care about the environment that nurturing is taking place in. The other thing that greenhouse operators are concerned about are the inputs. So in a greenhouse, help me out, what are the inputs that go into the plant? You have things like water, soil, fertilizer, sunshine, sometimes compost, which is in the fertilizer realm as well, but all those different inputs that are going in. And in our schools, that's the instruction, right? That's the input you're giving into your students, the instruction. Finally, greenhouse operators know that if you take a plant that has been greenhoused, by the way, do some of y'all start like tomato plants in your house while it's still cold in the wintertime and you move them outside to a garden or maybe some other plants like that? You take a plant that's been coddled its whole life, it's like just really cared for, and then you just drop it into a harsh environment, that's a problem. There needs to be a period of time where that plant starts feeling the wind a little bit. It's protected. You might plant it in your garden, but you might cover it when it's extra cold outside. So there is a hardening off of the plant. This is sort of like we talked about David getting seasoned. Like you take a cast iron skillet and you need to cure it. There needs to be a time of hardening off. And I would say in our schools, these are times when students have experiences, a way to put into practice the thing they're learning. And instead of just dropping them off the deep end when they leave out of our schools, could our schools think about how do we help students practice some of the things? You know, a classroom is much more, can be, if the culture is right, a classroom can be a much nicer place to fail than up front on Sunday morning in church. You know? So you may want to think about that. What's the hardening off period look like? So I'm going to look at each of these areas, the culture, the instructional experiences, and just paint a little picture about what the nurture could look like. So let's just talk about school culture a little bit. And I just have a few characteristics. I know you don't have a lot of space in your notes there, but I just have a few key characteristics that I'm just going to throw out there to say, hey, here are things that I think will help nurture young people who love the Lord. One is that the people at school should really be vibrantly Christ-centered. They should be contagious. You can just put that. If you're a teacher, you better have some sort of contagion. You better be sick, but sickly in the way that you're in love with Jesus Christ and what He's doing in the world. You can't raise up people that are excited about what God is doing in the world if you're not excited about God doing in the church. It's amazing. God told Abraham, I will bless the whole world through you, and we get to be a part of that. You're like an actor on stage at this point in your life. It's a really long play. It goes for thousands of years, but you're in it, and you can be in it. You have a chance to be involved in what God is doing in the world. That's amazing. And so somehow your students, you can do this in quiet ways if you're a quiet person. If you're like me and go to Puerto Rico where everyone is loud all the time, we party whether we're losing or winning, okay? Then you're going to be loud like me, and that's okay, but not everybody likes loud people. And so it doesn't matter, quiet, loud, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about really being excited, deep down inside with a steady joy. We get to be involved in God's work in the world. And so to have the right environment, you've got to have gardeners who love gardening, okay? People will grow up loving God either. I think that because God is interested in people, right? At the end of the day, God is in the people business. Our schools need to have environments where there is just a lot of compassion. When you talk about what's happening in Israel and in Palestine with your students, when you talk about what's happening on the border between Mexico and Texas, you'd better sound different than the politicians. I don't care if they're on the right side or on the left side. And our schools have better feel because there should be compassion for other people. See, those people crossing the border, they're the people who go to my church on Sunday morning, okay, in Miami. And we have a hurting world. And if we want people to grow up and care about what God is doing in the world, we need to have schools. That involves what you put on your walls in your classroom, the books you read to your students, just a culture of real caring, or we won't raise people who care about what God is doing in the world. And we need to have schools. We're talking about the environment now, the environment of the school, kind of the mood, the feel in the school. Schools need to be places that are servant honoring. Who are the students' heroes? And you need to introduce them to other people who are involved in what God is doing. One of the practices I have is, when I have high school students, is invite people in and interview them. Sometimes instead of asking someone to come talk to your students, some people aren't always very good at that. But you can ask them questions, and it's much more conversational. So find someone in your community who really is serving the Lord faithfully and interacts with you all. Maybe it's the guy who works at the hardware store, but he has an incredible ministry of talking to people about Jesus. We'll invite him in and interview him from your students. If we have someone come to our church who's maybe a missionary somewhere, I invite them into school the next morning, and I interview them in front of my students. Hey, tell us about what you do. Why did you choose to do that? And then I'll say this. I have some students right here in my class who really are excited about what God's doing in the world. If they wanted to do what you do, well, what should they do? How should they start preparing themselves? But again, it's shaping. You're honoring the people you want to honor. And it's not just the celebrities, okay? It's the common everyday people. It's reading stories to them. It's telling stories. Okay? Does that make sense? That's the culture we want in our schools. Now, we need instruction. We want skillful people. And so I would suggest that Christian schools will look a little different. In the public schools, the big thing is STEM. Science, technology, help me out, engineering and mathematics. If you really want to be someone, be an engineer. I remember I was in college studying to be a teacher, and I was taking chemistry, and the prof was Dr. Simon, and he said, don't be a teacher. You're like, go be an engineer. You could be an engineer, make a lot of money, then you can go be a teacher. You see, we should be different. And I think that because God is in the business of helping people get into relationship with Him, our school's curriculum should be particularly people-focused. I love science, okay? And science is useful to people. But I think our schools should really care about history geography and things like that as well, where students get to taste and experience other people that God loves. And so I think there should be a real orientation into people focus. Teaching history and geography, cultures, you don't need to write all this down, languages, those are the sorts of things. I think that soccer is one of the key things that we should be teaching in our schools. I think it's one of the most strategic tools to reach the world. Why? Or football, if you see Spanish. It's played all over the world. And you know what advantage you have? Anywhere you go in the world, if you can dribble a soccer ball and you can play soccer, you immediately have friends. You don't have to be the best, but if you know something about soccer, I think every Mennonite school in the United States and Canada and Mexico should teach soccer, period. And I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. I think it's strategic. Now, don't go home and say, we have to play soccer. Okay? Don't do that, okay? I'm not saying that. I'm just painting pictures. Like, what would happen if in the United States, we would divide our nation into quadrants? And all the schools in the Pacific Northwest their students would all study Mandarin and Chinese from 5th grade up. And all the schools in the Northeast would study Arabic. And all the schools in the Southeast would study Spanish. That'd be easier for me. And all the schools in the far Southwest would study, help me out. German. Okay, whatever, French. Do you think we'd have more people moving to Saudi Arabia as missionaries if we did that? Would we have more people prepared to relate to people? Like a seventh of the world's population speaks Mandarin and Chinese. Okay, so why don't we do it? Okay, I'm just saying, like we need to think here. How can we prepare people to be involved in God's work? Okay. The other thing is just we're talking about instruction, and I'm just going to I just picked some here, but think. What skills are needed in your church? Do you need people who can sing in your church?
Yes.
Right, we're talking, yes. And so guess what we should do? We should teach people how to sing. Do you need people in your church who can give devotional meditations or things like that? Do you need that in your church? Teach Sunday school maybe? You need it?
Yes.
If you do, where are they learning it? And so our curriculums, our school curriculums, I think if we're really serious about what we said we're serious about, which is preparing people for the church, then we need to say what classes, and by the way, you don't have to start a new class. You can just make sure that in your English class in 1st grade, little children learn how to stand up in front of their class and read stories out loud. Well, you've just improved the Bible reading in your church 15 years from now. Okay, so it happens at every age level. It's simply saying, what are the skills that our young people need to function well in the church? And I don't mean being a missionary in China, although we need those as well. I'm talking about living well in Oklahoma. Because people in Oklahoma need Jesus. I promise you, there are a lot of Christians there, but not everybody's Christian, right? Or in Texas. Texas really needs Jesus. But around here reminds me where I live in South Carolina. Flat fields, I love it. Where I live, there aren't so many fields. Just a lot of houses. All right. Now the last category, save room for our story here at the end. You get tired. We need to practice giving our students a chance to practice the skills that we want them to learn. So, as a part of your schooling, think about how I can take the math assignments and English assignments and social studies assignments and actually have students do things with them where they're practicing the skills I want them to practice. So we can add extra things like going and singing at the local old people's home. That's really good. But you don't do that every day. But they need to do that. You know why? Because they need to learn how, when they sing to people, they should look at their faces and into their eyes. Little children do not know how to do this. They sing up front like this. No, you're going to train them before they go how to look. I had some students for a while that it was horrible. I'd go on field trips, and the person giving the tour would say, "Hey, how are y'all doing?" And my students would go, "Oh, okay." That's horrible. Like that's a really important skill, is to say, "I'm doing well. How are you doing?" Right? To meet incoming fire with outgoing fire, right? That's really. So I took my students to Atlanta, Georgia, to serve at a homeless shelter. We spent the night overnight at this homeless place, and I wanted them to serve. Notice, activities to develop skills. And I said, I'm going to take y'all there. We're going to go do this. But when that guy walks in the room and says, "Hey, how are y'all doing?" You're going to respond just like, and we practice, we role play. From then on, field trips are so much better because we practice. "Hey, how y'all doing?" Come on, y'all. Good. Okay, like really say, "Hey, how y'all doing today?" "Good." Oh, you see that? That's transformative, right? Instead of like, And so practice, develop skills. That's a very basic skill that you can develop in your students. Leading singing. Your students, are they going to, I don't know your churches, are they going to be expected to lead singing as an 18-year-old? Then they should lead singing in front of their students in their classroom. Are they going to be expected to sometimes produce a brochure at a business? I don't know. They're going to have to produce this one day. Okay? Where do they learn to do that? Well, I've done things where, like in a history class, I asked my students to take something they're learning instead of writing a report, to actually do, I don't know, a brochure, right? Because where else are they going to learn how to use Microsoft Publisher? So you hear what I'm saying? It's not about starting new classes. It's about asking yourself what are the skills and abilities that our students are going to need when they step out of school, and then embedding those into whatever you're already doing. Bible teaching, etc. I do think that our schools should teach how to study the Bible and how to teach the Bible. Okay? And I do that with my older students. They need to learn how to actually study the Bible and how to teach it. So I want to conclude with a story of two of my heroes. Or four of my heroes. Myron and Ada and Walter and Melinda Taylor. Two couples who paint a picture of what I'm talking about. These people should be heroes in our schools. So Myron was from Michigan. They were brethren in Christ. And Myron and Ada met when they were missionaries in Zambia, in Africa. They were married in Africa in 1909, and then in 1912 moved back to Michigan. And they wanted to move back to Africa. They wanted to go back to Africa and carry the gospel to a part of Africa that needed the gospel, but the mission agency was low on funds. And so I guess they kept badgering the mission agency, and eventually the mission agency said, okay, if you want to go, you raise the funds, you figure out how to take care of the financing, and then you can go back to Africa. Well, one evening in 1912, Myron was sitting on the front porch visiting his brother Walter. He was at Walter's farm. They were farmers in Michigan. And Walter, his brother, and Melinda were aware of Myron's plans of going back to Zambia. And Walter had a few questions. He asked his brother, he says, there are so few missionaries. Shouldn't you wait until others go that are better prepared than you are? Or to better prepare your way? And he asked whether there are good houses there, whether there are good roads there, whether there are doctors and schools for Myron and Ada's little girls. And then he said, well, who's going to support you? Where do you get your money? And the conversation kind of went on. About a week later, Walter and Myron met again, and Walter made an offer. He said, my wife and I have been talking about your situation. We know you want to be a missionary. And he said, here's the deal. I, Walter, and my wife will stay home on mission. We'll farm. You, Myron, you go back to Africa. And we're going to farm to support you. All our income that we make is going to go to you. You're going to serve in Africa. I'm going to serve the mission. But we're a team. Now here's the deal. You can't tell anybody about what's going on. So they agreed. They made the deal. One brother stayed on the mission and farmed. The other brother went to Africa to serve as a missionary. And for 25 years, Myron and Ada served in Africa. And for 25 years, Walter served in Michigan. And while Myron built schools and started churches and helped the sick and shared the good news of the gospel and apparently hunted lions, Walter farmed and lived frugally and was often criticized by the people in Michigan for not providing well for his family. You see, his buildings didn't get painted as often as some others' buildings did, and his crops sometimes didn't have the fertilizer that he needed, and he had a rusty old car, and people said, yeah, he's not a good manager. And they criticized. But Walter and Myron stayed quiet. Back in Africa, Myron would follow road construction workers back into parts of Africa, into remote areas, to share the stories of Jesus. And it was on one of those trips when something tragic happened. There was a lion prowling around. By the way, here's a picture of him with apparently lion hunting earlier. There was a lion prowling around, and it was frightening the workers, and so a trap was set for the lion. And the lion got in the trap, but got out. He was injured. He was dangerous. And Myron volunteered to go for the lion, but he didn't have his rifle with him. And so he borrowed one and set out with 5 guys to hunt down this lion. They went a few miles into the bush where they were able to track the lion. The lion was angry. Myron shot twice at the lion and missed. When he reloaded, his 3rd cartridge jammed in his gun. He wasn't able to pull off a shot, and the lion charged him. Myron, all alone because everybody else had run away, grabbed the gun and started using it as a club to beat at the lion. But eventually it broke and the lion attacked him. He kicked at the lion grabbed him right down here, broke both of the bones in his leg, right above his ankle. He broke his right hand, his wrist was crushed, 2 fingers were bitten off. The lion eventually left, and they made a stretcher out of branches and a blanket, and they carried him back to the mission 30 miles. 2 doctors arrived, they tried to operate him, but he died during the operation. The next day he was buried by a very great people. It was many years until anyone knew how those 2 brothers had partnered and made choices that looked foolish to the world, but were invested in what Jesus is doing good in His church. Now, what I want to suggest to you is this. If we do our jobs right, now, if we do our jobs, if our churches and parents and schools do our job right, it doesn't matter whether you're a farmer or a missionary. Because if we're all pulling on the same rope in the same direction, remember how we started? God needs everybody. See, this talk is not about how we raise up more teachers or more preachers. Do we need more teachers? Yes. Do we need more preachers? Yes. Do we need more missionaries? Yes. But we need more moms and dads and farmers because all of us can be investing and pushing in the same direction. This story, maybe you all know this story. Have you read the book? It's called 2 Brothers, One Mission. Every school should have a copy. Like, these are the sort of heroes, especially the guy who stayed home and got criticized for not being a good steward. These are the sort of people that our schools, that our children should hear about. And may our schools work to raise up young people like them that are involved in God's work in the world, regardless of what they're doing in the moment. Making chocolate pudding, raising children, being a nurse, or being an entrepreneur. Let's read together. Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. To live wisely for the Lord. Remember the topic title? To redeem the educational time. To live wisely for the Lord, this passage has 3 components. A careful, continuous analysis of the way we are living. Some versions use the word circumspectly. Circumnavigate means to go around, right? Circum is around. Spect has to do with spectacles. To circumspect is to look around. Look around very carefully how you walk. Pay attention. Analyze how we're living. Number 2, making sure we make the best use of the time because the days are evil. And the days are not just evil because people are doing bad things. Sometimes the days are evil because we're leaving the good things undone. Right? You can spend a lot of time doing good things, but not doing the thing that God wants us to be doing. So an intentional life that takes advantage. And thirdly, an active effort to live out, to understand what is the will of God. There are few areas more critical to make the best use of our time than to be teaching and training babies how to become adults. I'll say that again. If you look around and you ask, what's the best use of my time, noticing that the days are evil, there's a lot of work to be done, and try to figure out what God's will is. There are a lot of things to be doing, but you could argue that there are some that are very strategic, and one of those is taking little babies, raising them up to being adults who have the skills, the understanding, and the experiences so that they're involved in what Jesus is doing in the world, which is to build His church. And have I made it clear that does not mean that every one of our students is to be the local pastor. Right? Remember Myron and Walter. The occupation doesn't matter that much. What What matters is they're engaging in what God is doing. Okay? All right, let's go do it. Monday can't come soon enough now, right? All right. Thank you. Okay, where do we go from here? Wallace over there. I didn't hear very well. I didn't listen very well. I heard, but didn't listen very well. Do we go back to the auditorium for the small group times now?
It's to the discussion group.
To the discussion groups.
They're split.
Oh, they're split. You're supposed to go straight to the discussion right now. Okay, that's
Upper grades are in the auditorium, board members are here, and lower grades are in the bottom classroom.
okay.
I
So
think it's
board members and principals here. So you have like
10-20, so you have 15 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
something in through there that you can use the restroom, talk to the person beside you, and go. By the way, I'm gonna the board, the group that is doing this did ask me. They asked me if I wanted to take a teeny little bit of time to talk about what I'm doing in Miami. But if you want a heads up, you can go to our website, centralmiamichristian.org. That's the school's website, or there's the QR code that'll take you there. And if you would like to receive quarterly updates on what's happening in Miami, you can sign up on our website to do that. I do not send out lots of emails. You don't get one weekly, all that thing like that. But I'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing in Miami. But that's it.